Some of Hollywood's best-known stars pay tribute to John Ford on Monday evening on BBC2, with scenes from his most famous films and an interview with the director featured in The American West of John Ford on Monday at 9:15. Thursday's film in the Rock Hudson season is Come September.
How are you, Dino?
Wealthy industrialist Robert Talbot returns 3 months early to his Italian villa to discover that all is not as it might first appear.
Mr. Talbot, for an unexpected pleasure.
How are you?
A bit surprised.
Huh?
To see you here in July, you never come until September.
Certain guests appear to be uninvited.
What's that?
Girls.
I know they're girls. What are they doing here?
They'll be gone in the morning.
They're staying here tonight?
Others are more welcome.
Excuse me. I have some duties. A major domo's day is never done.
Yours is. Don't think of yourself as a major domo. More like a sentry at an ammunition dump that's about to blow up.
Rock Hudson and Gina Lollobrigida star in Come September on Thursday at 8:30. Now it's back to Tuesday's programmes, which continue with Newsnight.
Good evening. The unemployment total in Britain has risen today to a new record of over 3.25 million. That's 1 in 7 of the workforce. At the same time, Britain's trade figures have moved further into the black. I'll be asking senior Tory backbencher Sir William Clarke and the TUC's David Basnett to sort out the statistics and assess our real economic prospects. And from Sheffield, Sally Hardcastle will be reporting on the battle one local authority is waging against unemployment and recession. In the United States tonight, there's been a new development in the continuing dispute between President Reagan and his European allies over the Soviet pipeline project. A federal judge has ruled against an American company which wanted to help in the piping of Russian natural gas to Western Europe. We'll have a report from Washington later.
In the Middle East, the evacuation of the PLO through Syria has been delayed, but there's evidence that the Israelis are substantially reducing their forces. And yesterday's election of the Maronite Christian Bashir Gemayel to the presidency has only prompted, not prevented, further violence. A series of systematic attacks on the homes of those MPs who took part in yesterday's election bodes ill for a future peaceful Lebanon. We'll be reporting on that and the latest hitch in the plans for the rest of the PLO to leave overland. And we'll be taking a look at why the Pope has decided to give Opus Dei its own bishop. Dr. John Roach was once a member of the secretive Catholic Society. He left it because he thought their organization was fascist. I'll be asking him why he thinks that the Pope's blessed them with a bishop.
At the Edinburgh Festival, I'll be talking to Dame Irene Worth about an opera without music, and to Joachim Hertz, director of the Dresden Opera. A play on the fringe takes us to World War I and the friendship between war poet Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen. And we celebrate the work of a painter who was almost a contemporary of theirs, the now 89-year-old Miro.
All that later in the programme. First tonight, the economy. Today's new record unemployment total of almost 3.3 million, that's nearly 14% of the total workforce, has brought bitter reaction both from trade unions and from opposition politicians. Labour's employment spokesman Eric Varley accused Mrs Thatcher of leading a no-hope government, and he said these disastrous figures demand that the Prime Minister abandons her stubborn heartlessness. For the Social Democrats, David Owen called the figures a major national catastrophe, and he declared that unemployment at these levels would be the obituary of this government. Well, of course, the government isn't by any means dead yet, but today at least it has been lying very low, and usually no senior minister has been available to comment on unemployment or on the economy as a whole. And the unemployment figures are undeniably bad news. More than 100,000 adults and 2,000 school leavers joined the jobless total in the past month, taking the total to nearly 3.3 million. After a decline in the first few months of this year, the rate of increase in the number of jobless began to rise in May, and the key number of job vacancies is still very low. However, there was some better news for the government in the July trade figures, also out today. Still buttressed by Britain's oil wealth, exports exceeded imports by £166 million, and when invisible earnings are included, Britain's current account is in the black by more than £300 million. That's double the June figure. In the past week, too, there have been signs of optimism on the stock exchange at indications of falling interest rates, although the mood there was more cautious today. And the IMF, in its annual report published this week, has specifically singled out the policies being pursued by Mrs. Thatcher as the best way to escape from recession in the long run. Well, amid these apparently conflicting indicators, what is the real outlook now for the British economy? With me are the chairman of the Conservative Backbench Finance Committee, Sir William Clark, and the chairman of the TUC's Economic Committee, David Basnett. Mr. Basnett, already today you have described the government as destroying the livelihood and self-esteem of men and women, but is the picture all black?
Oh yes, I think it's totally black. If you take unemployment to start with, I mean, since this government came to power, we're now in a situation where there are 2 million more people on the dole. We've reached the situation where there are 1 million people who've been without a job for a year. It really is creating, well, let me not use my own words. I mean, on Sunday, the Secretary of State for Employment said that if it went on any further, it would tear at our social fabric. And that's clearly what it's beginning to do. Now,
also on Sunday, Sir William Clark, if I can bring you in at that point, Mr. Norman Tebbit said that unemployment was now somewhere near the plateau, somewhere near the top. Is there any indication from today's figures that that prediction was true?
Oh yes, I think you'll find that for the last 5-6 months, various ministers, including Sir Geoffrey Howe, has in fact said that the unemployment figures will go up, and they have gone up. They're not going up quite obviously as fast as they were going, but nevertheless, I would have thought that the whole of the Conservative Party are extremely concerned about unemployment, and I don't think anybody in the party would deny that. I think where there are differences of opinion is to what we do about it. Mr. Basnett really gives the impression that the level of unemployment is the fault of this government. I would remind you that there is a world recession, and other countries, other Western democracies, are in fact experiencing very high levels of unemployment.
There was also a recession during the last Labour government's regime, but unemployment since Mrs. Thatcher was elected has gone up much more.
No. I think if you compare, the recession started under the last Labour government, and we came in May of '79, and there the recession, the recession, in fact, accelerated then.
No, I wasn't implying that unemployment is the fault of this government. I'm stating quite clearly that there is. Obviously, there is a world recession, and that has an effect on this country, as it must do on every industry, on every industrial society. But the fact is, unemployment has been rising here more quickly than other countries. I mean, our problem is what underlies this, what is happening to British industry.
Yeah, but what has happened? I think
let's hear his analysis first.
Let me say what's happening. If you look at manufacturing industry in this country, the very sight of what's happened in Liverpool, the Secretary of State for the Environment having to go up to Toxteth 1 day a week is a consequence of this government's policies. Very little doubt about that at all. Yeah. The fact that we're getting 15 bankruptcies a week, that you've got an insolvency every hour, this is what's happening to our economy. Now, the problem is this: when we come out of this depression, if we're not careful, we won't have an industry to expand, because it is being destroyed by this government's policies. No, that's precisely what is happening.
No, I don't really agree with that, and I think if you reflect, you really in your own heart don't believe that one. I'll tell you why. You know as well as I do that under successive governments, the cost of employment has gone up, and in fact wage and salary claims have gone on willy-nilly to the exclusion as to what's happening with production. And quite obviously, if you increase salaries and wages without increasing production, then quite obviously the price of that product goes up. And what has happened is, we have over the years priced ourselves out of the market.
I'll let you answer that point in a moment, but let's come back to what you yourself, Sir William, talked about different remedies, even inside the Conservative Party. How do you think the country can move onto a plateau and then down from the present level of unemployment?
Well, I don't think there's any easy answer, any overnight answer to unemployment. It's going to take some time to get unemployment down, for the simple reason that our competitive position isn't as good as it should be. And I mean, you've only got to look at our imports. Why are people in this country buying, shall we say, a foreign motor car? Simply because the British motor car isn't sufficiently competitive. And this is what we've really got to get into people, the competitive nature of industry. Now, quite obviously,
British Leyland, for example, have been making great strides in increasing their competitiveness.
Oh, they have.
What more can you expect them to do?
But they have. But nevertheless, their share of the market isn't as large as I'd like it to be, and I'm sure it isn't as large as most people would like it to be. And this is simply because the foreign competition in small motor cars particularly is so great. And I would have thought that what we have got to do is to continue. And don't forget this, the government are spending quite a lot of taxpayers' money on the unemployment. I mean, the youth opportunity thing, the training schemes and so on.
Do you agree, David Basnett, that we have to become more competitive? And if so, what's your approach to bring that about?
Yes, certainly. Industry must be competitive. We're an entrepreneur nation. We have to live by our exports in the end. There is no argument about that. But just let me pick up a number of points. You'd think, listening to Sir William, that it's everybody's fault but the government's. And it very clearly is the government's. There is, and I agree with him, that unemployment costs a lot of money. 12 billion a year spent to keep unemployed people on the dole. Now, that's ridiculous. I mean, you could spend that money to create jobs, and you could be creating jobs.
Without increasing inflation again?
Well, let me finish what I say. What you need to do is to start a capital-led reflation, not a consumer-led reflation. That would lead to inflation, but a capital-led reflation would create jobs.
What sort of things, to spend money on what sort of things, for example?
Well, for instance, the electrification of the railways, and the obvious example.
Where would you get the money from?
That would, well, I'll answer that in a moment. That would, first of all, lead to an improvement in our communications, which we need, and secondly, lead to expansion in our manufacturing industry. It would have an important effect. Where do you get the money from? The money is here in this country. You can raise it by taxation, you borrow it. Are you prepared to pay 12 billion out to keep people on the dole, or are you prepared to use money to create jobs? That's the basic proposition.
Yes, Mr. Bassett.
Would you answer that proposition specifically,
yes,
please?
This is what's happened in the past. The spending of public money seems to be the panacea of eliminating unemployment. President Mitterrand in France at this moment has increased his public expenditure, and look at his economy. It's in an absolute mess. His inflation is rising rapidly. His unemployment is rising rapidly. Prices are going up. Now, that isn't the way. We've been down this road.
No, Sir William, just finally to you, it's not just President Mitterrand who thinks that public spending may be one way of reducing unemployment. In your own party, there are people who want to see that. For example, today at lunchtime, your backbench colleague, Jim Lester, was calling for a modest reflation in an autumn budget by the Chancellor. What would you say to that sort of call?
Well, I think that would be disastrous myself. We have done this before. We have, if you like, panicked. Successive governments have panicked and started spending money. It's a short-term expedient. The long-term, and I agree with the IMF, the long-term solution to this country is we're going to go through some hard times, and we're going to have high unemployment for some time. But the long-term prospect of new businesses, and I take the point that Mr. Basnett makes about bankruptcies and so on, but the bankruptcies are exceeded by the new businesses that are starting
No,
up.
they're not.
Well,
Sir William Clark, Sir William,
no, look,
David Basnett.
I'm sorry, there's an important question here.
One sentence, we can't go on with the debate any longer, really.
But how many unemployed are this government prepared to tolerate before they introduce policies that will create new jobs? That's a question the government will not answer. They need to answer, because the public need to know.
Final last word.
Well, I would have thought what this government are trying to do. No government can legislate for employment or to abolish unemployment. All the government can do is set the scene whereby commerce and trade and manufacturing industry can prosper. And with the business start-up scheme, the enterprise zones and the retraining schemes, I think the government are in fact doing this.
So William,
Well, if
David
this is your
Bassnett,
idea of prosperity,
Thank
I
you.
don't agree.
thank you both very much indeed. Well, whatever measures may or may not be forthcoming from the government to stimulate the economy nationally, some local authorities have been trying independently to boost economic activity in their areas. One such is in Sheffield, which already has the average UK unemployment rate of 1 in 7, and where there is a threatened loss of 700 more jobs after the merger of 2 steelworks there last Friday. The Labour-controlled City Council in Sheffield is running its own campaign, paid for out of the rates, to save old jobs and to create new ones. But in spite of recent calls from the CBI for more help for industry, the campaign is being regarded with suspicion by local businessmen. Sally Hardcastle has been finding out why.
Today in Sheffield, nearly 41,000 people are unemployed, 13.9% of the working population. The industries that once made Sheffield strong, steel and the products to be made from steel, are dying or dead. And the speed of their death has given new industries little time to take their place. 18 months ago, Sheffield City Council decided to invest the product of a twopenny rate, £1.8 million each year in the protection or creation of jobs. Since then, the Employment Department, started by Councillor Bill Mickey, a redundant former shop steward, claims to have bought 1,000 jobs for Sheffield. Yet this seemingly successful enterprise has brought the Labour-controlled council under attack for using ratepayers' money to meddle in local industry.
It's a council's business when we are elected year after year in a city that has a 500,000 population, which, if the industry closes altogether, means, in fact, we have no real jobs for our future generations, never mind the ones that are here now. And we have no money circulating, which keeps the shops and offices and everybody else going.
John Price, grandson of the man who founded Arthur Price of England,